Welcome to Justice Counts, the podcast that goes beyond the law to what's important to you. Equal justice for all is a guidepost for our nation, but how do we achieve that? Here are your hosts, writer-commentator Bob Gaddy and novelist-attorney Mark M. Bello.
Welcome to Justice Counts. Today, Mark Bello and I are with Carrie Kohan. Carrie is a national child advocate and spokesperson who has forced the change of several laws in Canada relating to child abuse and has written a book called The 5 Lessons of Life, which we will discuss. Mark, why don't you introduce our guest?
Thanks, Bob. In addition to forcing the government to change an entire body of Canadian law, Carrie founded Project Guardian and Mad Mothers Against Pedophiles, MMAP, in 1998. What MAD did for drinking and driving, Carrie seems to have done for pedophilia and the protection of children by educating the public and changing the laws. Like it was for me as a young lawyer in the 1980s, when I took on the Catholic Church and abusive priests. When Carrie began her journey as a child advocate, pedophilia was a kind of a taboo subject. No one wanted to acknowledge or talk about it. And as a lobbyist and activist, she was instrumental in changing 14 laws in Canada that now protect children from harm. Her legacies include the Amber Alert, the provincial and national sex offender registries, the Child Protection Act, which regulates online sexual exploitation, amendments to the Divorce Act and immigration laws, and she's the namesake of Carrie's Guardian Angel Law, which requires a 20-year minimum sentence for serial predators and pedophiles. Carrie, welcome to Justice Counts.
Oh, thanks so much. Wow, that was an intro. Oof.
I tell you what, it's very impressive, Carrie.
Well, I'm impressed myself when I consider where I came from. I mean, I was illiterate. I was in grade 8 and in the dummy class, and I failed grade 12. Everyone was telling me that I was lazy and I'd never amount to anything. And then this happened. And,
wow.
And it lit a fire underneath me. And I thought someone's got to stick up for the kids. And like you say, Mark, in the early or late 1990s and early 2000, this was taboo. No one wanted to talk about it.
Let's get right to it. You and I have something in common. We both brought down pedophiles in our career.
Cool.
Well before this was anything more than a dirty little secret.
Mm-hmm.
Your advocacy career has been primarily in Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, I have worked with the British government briefly on some larger cases, along with Sergeant Paul Gillespie out of the Toronto Crimes Unit. But majority, almost all of it has been through Canada.
And I understand that there was a particular little incident that happened in your life that happened to you and your own child. That took this quiet little homemaker and mother and turned her into a national advocate for children. Can you tell us about the incident a little bit?
Well, it's interesting how things happen in your life, and you're going along your path and you're thinking everything is fine, and boom, all of a sudden you're going in a totally different direction. And that's what happened. My former husband and I owned a mobile home park in northern British Columbia, and we went up to renovate it. So we were living in one of our own trailers, and it was a hot summer's day. I had the door open, the screen door was on, and I was chopping up some vegetables for lunch, and I felt someone behind me, and then I heard the floorboard. And I thought, oh my God, someone's right behind me. And I turned around quickly, and I had this it was a big knife in my hand. And he was over 6 feet. He was heading towards our nursery to grab our daughter. She was 2 years old at the time. And so I was able to get him out of the house with this big knife. I chased him out. And in a very short period of time, I discovered that he was 3-time convicted pedophile. He was a warrant expiry, meaning that he had served his full sentence. So At that time, he didn't have any parole officer watching him. He was back out into the public. And our laws were archaic, to say the least, at that time. And they still are terribly insufficient for children in Canada. So I started to research and ended up bringing a lot of American laws into Canada and studying what you guys were doing in the States and bringing that in.
So this guy was trying to get at your child? Is that what was happening?
Yeah, we know at least 8 children that he had molested over his life already by that time, and he was heading for the nursery to get her. When I phoned the neighbor who owns, this guy was our neighbor, and he was living in a little hotel next door. This is a northern community, right? And I phoned the woman next door who owned the motel and asked her, who is this guy? Because he said he was just coming in with a burnt roast to feed our dog, right? He actually premeditated. He had a burnt roast in his hand. And he knew that if he got caught, he could use that as an excuse for entering the house. And so she apologized profusely and said, "Oh my God, I never told you, Carrie, because he has a history with little boys, not girls, and you have a daughter." I said, "But my daughter looks like a little boy right now," because she was so sickly. She'd been in children's hospital. So we had to keep her hair really short, and we couldn't put any like dresses or anything. Everything had to be very loose fitting. She had giardia, beaver fever from contaminated water in the northern community. So her tummy was sore all the time. So she looked like a little boy, and he was trying to kidnap her. He was trying to get into the house to take her out of the nursery. Yeah.
Well, was this guy ever brought to justice?
He was. I actually got him on a historical charge long after, I had to go into hiding. It took me a full year to get a peace bond at that time against him. Back in the early 2000s, we had peace bonds, which, in Canada, which meant that we could make sure that he couldn't come anywhere near our family or children's playgrounds or swimming pools or, anywhere that there were children. And that took a full year to get that done. But I was persistent and got that, over his head. And then we went after a historical case. And that took probably, 8 more years at least. And he went back to prison for that one.
Whoa.
Yeah. So, but you know what? In Canada, 60% of pedophiles at that time, 100% of convicted pedophiles, 60% of those convicted pedophiles would actually serve time in prison. 40% would get house arrest. And of the 60% that would actually serve prison, their prison time was 6 to 8 months served. That was it. You could have multiple offenses and you would be tried as if it was just one. It was absolutely ridiculous laws.
Well, what's the process like now, Carrie?
It hasn't improved that much. I mean, we do have minimum sentencing now. We do have longer term sentencing, but it's nothing near what the States is. I used a great case law comparison in it was 2006. I was in front of the Justice Committee of Canada, and I was showing that 2 separate cases that were very similar, and one was in the States. What was his name? Jimmy. Anyways, he was convicted. He had molested his own daughter and created child pornography from it. And basically he was tried on 4 counts. So he got 130 years for those 4 counts and production and distribution of child pornography of his own daughter, which he should have, right? I believe. In the same case in Canada, we were looking at this guy in the States could be named. He was on a sex offender registry. Megan's Law was in place, so anyone could look him up or look up in the territory, how many pedophiles are in the area through Megan's Law. People are protected there. In Canada, it was a different story. We had a similar yet very different case. And by the way, the guy in the States, no prior convictions. This was his first conviction. And I'm almost laughing because it's so ludicrous. It's absolutely ridiculous. So the guy in Canada, on the other hand, he had 5,000 images, 5,000 videos that he was busted with, and he was caught molesting. I believe it was his own child from the age of 24 months to 6 years old, and creating child pornography from there. He had a prior conviction, and he got 13 years in prison for all of this huge prior conviction, all of, the distribution of all of these videos and these films and pictures. And he appealed it, and he got it reduced to 9 years. He was younger. He was 36 years old. His prior was when he was 17. And the judge out of Quebec, Coates, he cited the young age, not of the victim, but of the pedophile, that he was so young that he thought that he shouldn't be in prison so long. So he reduced the sentence from 13 years to 9 years. So, I was basically showing the Justice Committee of Canada an ECPAT study. It was a 178-page study. And this study showed that Canada was going to become the next pedophile haven for pedophiles. And this is in 2006. And I was showing the reasons why, because we had a lower age of consent. It was 14 at the time. And we had such lenient sentencing. So today, the lenient sentencing is really still there. You're not seeing the 100-year sentencing. Never, ever, ever would you see that in our country. And the age of consent went back to 16. I was able to fight for that one. That took me probably 5 years in total to get that through. I was aiming for 18, the age of 18 for consent, but we got 16 and settled with that. But this current government, Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, who I know well, I knew Justin before he became Prime Minister. I shared a stage with him at a youth conference years back. Anyways, he and the Liberal Party are once again working at reducing the age of consent again.
Why? Why?
That's a good question, isn't it? That's the $64,000 question, right? Why? When I was first doing this in the, again, early 2000s, I think it was 2003, the Liberal Party was working very hard at reducing the age of consent from 14 at that time to 12 with parental consent. And so I met with Martin Kohan, Wayne Easter, and the Prime Minister at the time. I had private meetings with all of them. Wayne Easter was our Solicitor General. Martin Kohan was our Justice Minister of Canada, the whole country. And all of them, it started off, I believe it was with Wayne Easter. He told me, or it might have been Martin Kohan, one of them told me that they were lowering the age of consent to 12. I just about had a conniption. And I asked why, and they said, well, we want to be more in alignment with some of the European countries. Like I think the Netherlands at the time, it was age 12 with parental consent. It's since changed. And so I went to, the Solicitor General, then I went to the Prime Minister. All three confirmed that the Liberal Party of Canada at that time was trying to lower the age to 12. So I went coast to coast. I got on every form of media you could imagine. I was on Canada AM, which is like Good Morning America. I was, radio, television, print, and I brought it across the country that they were trying to lower the age. Well, we were successful in, lobbying very hard without being a lobbyist. No money involved, but just political public pressure. And we were able to raise it up to 16.
But that still doesn't explain why. Why would they want a child of 12 to be able to give consent? I don't understand.
It muddies the water, right? All of a sudden, you have a situation where what is legal child pornography and which is not. All of a sudden, you have a child that's prepubescent, that is under the age of 12 or 13 years old, looking. And they may be 12 years old. but they look like they're 8, and so they give consent for sexual activity, and someone photographs it. All of a sudden, is that legal child pornography or is it not? So it's muddying the waters, and you have to ask yourself, what is the motive of people that are in a party, a political party, that are trying to do this? California was a great example recently with a lot of the changes in laws with Gavin Newsom, right? There's some
incredible.
Yeah,
I know, incredible. I know Bob has a question about MMAP, but before we move to that, I wanted to ask you, registry.
Yeah.
You mentioned that about the age of consent, and you mentioned that you can now get a person convicted that you couldn't before, and you mentioned the number of years, 9, that he served in prison, which is small.
No.
He's now 45 years old. He gets out. Does this follow him? Does he have to register as a sex offender? How does that work in Canada?
Well, 2 points there. 9 years doesn't mean 9 years in Canada, because 9 years can actually mean anywhere between 3 and 6. You don't actually serve your full term unless you're a dangerous offender.
You have a different calendar? Is that what
we do? Yeah. So, and then you get credit for time served while you're waiting for your trial. So a lot of these pedophiles walk out of prison right after they are convicted because they've already done the amount of time served while waiting for their court case, maybe 2 years, 3 years to get into the court system. So,
and is there a registry?
Yes, I worked very hard on that. Actually, that was with Premier, which would be like a governor, Premier of the province, Ralph Klein. So Ralph was interesting. He was a retired reporter that ran for politics, and he was probably one of the more honest reporters and politicians that I had ever met. He helped me get started. He helped me start MAP. I phoned the provincial office and said, this is my dream. I want to, start a campaign. And he gave me City Hall. He organized the stands, the podiums, the police chief, everything. And he got it started. So we have a sex offender registry, probably because of him. I brought the fact that I had been trying for 2 years to get a national sex offender registry with our national justice minister, who at the time was Lawrence Macaulay. So Lawrence didn't want anything to do with it. He didn't want a registry at all. And I never trusted Mr. Macaulay whatsoever. So I went to Ralph Klein, the governor, the premier, and he agreed. And so he took it to the premier's province, and he put it out to all the premiers right across the entire country, and all of them joined in. And so we got a national, provincial sex offender registry, and it started in Alberta. So we started our own. We thought, screw the country, the heads of the country. We're going to do it ourselves. And we did. We got the Alberta Sex Offender Registry. So it started to go right across the country. Well, Lawrence Macaulay got a little nervous about this because he was losing control. And so he came back and he ordered all the premiers to, toe the line, to go along with him. And he would create a national sex offender registry. The challenge was that it took me 2 years of pushing with Lawrence Macaulay to still get it in front of the Justice Committee. I was a federal government witness, which means basically you sit in front of the Justice Committee. I'm sure you've seen videos of it where you have like 4 witnesses, and then you have, this old ancient looking kind of, it's like everyone's sitting in a square, right? And you have the 3 sides with the Justice Committee, and then the witnesses are here at the end of the table. And we worked very hard with this sex offender registry. So Lawrence Macaulay ended up, when I was in front of the Justice Committee, he ended up putting in 2 loopholes. And he made it that it's dependent upon the judge whether or not the pedophile gets on the sex offender registry or not. So you could have a pedophile-friendly judge that goes, oh, you know, he's too young. He really shouldn't spend that time in prison, all that time in prison. So, and we're not going to put him on the registry. Or you can get a hard-nosed one, and that says, darn right, we're going to put him on the registry. It really became an inequality with our sex offender registry, because there are loopholes now. So it's left to the judges to decide.
What would be the logic of opposing a registry like that?
Well, you have to wonder, 20% of the male population, apparently, I think it's too high of a number, actually. I don't think it's that high. But they say 20% of the male population are pedophiles, and 20 in 100. Yeah, so 20% are pedophiles, and 20% of all the pedophiles are females. So, when you look at 300 politicians that are sitting in front of you, in the House of Commons, and you do the numbers and you think, okay, 20 out of 100, so 60 of these sitting here out of the 300 have to be statistically pedophiles themselves, and they're making laws, they're influencing. You could see that there was no logic. I was banging my head, trying to get some of these laws through that would be no-brainers, you would think, at least the general population would think. And yet in Ottawa, no, they were trying very hard to lower the age of consent.
Wow. Well, does Mad Mothers Against Pedophiles still exist? Do you still?
No, I retired and no one picked up the round, but there were other organizations that came in after and did well. Beyond Borders, they did really, really well. And they had lawyers on staff, actually. See, I never collected a dime. I never wanted any money because I didn't want to be in anyone's back pocket. So I volunteered for 17 years to do all of this. And that way I could do it with a good conscience and never have anyone influence me, right? So the organization itself did really well. We had 3,500 members our first year, and we did have money come in that we could actually have an office. So it paid for the maintenance of stuff, but it just became too political, and so I ended up stepping away and just doing the work myself.
See that politics always gets in the way, man.
Yeah, when you get money involved, and
now, Carrie, you're not a public speaker.
No,
you're not a lawyer. You're not a lawyer.
No. Yeah.
I presume you were not always comfortable being an advocate for children. What allowed you to overcome your fears and become such a powerful force? Were there any other events in your life that allowed you to do that?
Yeah, good question. Oh boy, my former husband was business partners with Tony Robbins. So he was the public speaker. He was the one, and I was surrounded by really great public speakers. I watched them, but I never did it myself. And I was the person behind the scenes that was organizing everything all the time. So when I died, a couple of times, I basically heard very clearly that I was supposed to come back. I needed to come back to do something. And at the time, I didn't know what it was. But I started getting visions, you might say. Well, yeah, they were. I mean, not even that you might say. I started getting some clear direction of what I needed to do. And at first, it was really awkward. I fought it. I did not want to be on the podium. I kept seeing a vision that I was on the podium. I was speaking to people and I was saying, enough is enough. We have to make a difference. And I was like, yeah, I'm not the speaker. He is, my former husband. And so long story short, we had a situation called Lisa's Law. And that's where I really cut my teeth in public speaking, because I should go back a little bit. We moved to Calgary from this northern community. For 2 years, I waited for someone else to change the laws. I thought, I'll just help them, I'll wait for them. But no one showed up. And finally, I was living in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and they had 2 little girls that were molested in their own homes. And the babysitter was tied up and put in the bathroom. And it was an 18-year-old kid that did this. And I thought, that's it. When kids are being molested in their own home, that's it. That was a straw. So that's when I phoned Ralph Klein. He organized, City Hall, and we announced the start of Mad Mothers Against Pedophiles. This was because I wanted to do what Mad Mothers Against Drunk Drivers was doing, educate the public, change the laws, right? And I wanted to do that for pedophilia. So started it. I did a little bit of public speaking there, but I was a nervous wreck. I let everyone else speak. I brought in the police chief. I get to the mic, I would introduce someone, and then I'd let them take over. It was not, not my forte. And then we had something happen. It was Lisa Dillman. So Lisa Dillman was a young mom. She was married to a doctor, Dr. Schneidberger. He was from South Africa, and he had molested a family member of theirs, and then he had a 4 and 5-year-old daughter with Lisa that at the time of all of this event. So they hadn't seen him in years. They didn't really even know their father because he had been in prison. And so anyways, Schneeberger was in prison. He was a physician. The College of Physicians paid for 5 lawyers to defend him. She was a single mom by all, concern. And she had to pay for her own legal defense to protect her kids from having to go into the Bowden prison and visit their father. That's what he was trying to do, was establish a relationship with his 4 and 5-year-old daughters. And Lisa was going to run. She was actually going to run to the States and go into hiding. And so I got wind of this through a reporter. That was back in the days when, you could trust a lot of reporters. It was investigative reporters. I'm not a big fan of reporters nowadays. And so anyways, I learned about this and I contacted her, and she said she was going to run. She wasn't going to abide by the courts. And I begged her, I said, please give me 48 hours. I'll see what I can do, because this was a Friday. And by Monday, she had to be in Bowden prison with her 4 and 5-year-old in the visiting center of a sex offender prison. So these little 4 and 5-year-old kids would be in the common visiting area surrounded by all these pedophiles. Can you imagine? And it was court ordered that she do this. If she was in violation of the court order, she would lose custody of her kids. So she felt she had no choice. So in 24 hours, I organized 400 people that showed up at Bowden prison. And we realized that we couldn't stop her from entering. Like, the courts would have to force her to enter. But we as a collective could stop her from actually entering physically. And that way she wasn't in violation of the court order, you see. So I organized this huge mob of friendly folk that were supportive, and we physically stood in front of the vehicles. We couldn't block with cars because the cars would have been towed, and it was a mess. Would have been a mess. So we all physically stood outside the prison and stopped her from entering, and the police were fine with that. And so she did enter. She did ask that they had a court psychologist with the kids as well. And the court psychologist said, if it's traumatic enough for the kids, then we can actually have this court order nullified. We can show that this is too traumatic for the kids. So we actually had to let them go into the entrance, and the kids were terrified. This was horrific for them. And so the court psychologist said enough. They didn't actually go into the pedophile, common room where everyone was waiting. They were all it was ridiculous. So we ended up changing the laws. We, through that, worked very hard. After it, we had a press conference right across the country that I organized. And we put so much pressure politically on the government that we were able to change the laws that no court could order children to go into a pedophile prison, a sex offender prison for visitation again. But I didn't stop there. He was an immigrant from South Africa. He was white South African, and he had lied at the time that he was taking his Canadian citizenship. So he actually vowed that he hadn't broken the law when he was becoming a Canadian citizen, but he actually did. He had raped his own patients and was drugging them. It's a really interesting story because he actually put a vial of another man's blood underneath his bicep. He cut open his bicep and he put a vial of blood in. And this is how methodical he was. So when he finally had to give DNA, he stuck, the nurse went to take a sample and he goes, "I'm a doctor, I'll do it." And he pulled rank, and he put the needle into the vial that he had just put in. Imagine the pain of someone else's, another patient's blood and a different DNA. And he pulled out the blood from this vial that he had hidden underneath the skin in his bicep. I mean, just unbelievable case. So the DNA was showing that there wasn't a match, but we were able to show later what he had actually done. So I went after him with the Immigration Minister of Canada. And 2 years it took me of writing and writing and writing and writing. And finally, when he was released from prison, he was escorted onto a plane and he was sent to an undisclosed destination because we couldn't tell anyone where he was going, but he was taken out of the country and never to be allowed to come back to Canada. So.
Now, all of this work that you've done as a national advocate for kids and the very dramatic instances that you've described, how has that affected how you have been treated over the years? We'll get the answer to that question when we return following this message.
It started off, it sucked. It was not fun. I'm sure Mark can relate to this, because when you're starting to trailblaze, it's like when you're starting to cut a path through the forest, it hurts. You get a lot of thorns, you got a lot of scratches and bruises. But once that path is paved, then it's easy going, right? And that was it. When I first started, I lost a lot of family, support, friends, in-law family. They weren't pleased with what I was doing, and I don't know, it was a really tough time. It probably cost me my marriage, actually, because it took so much time. And at that time, we didn't have any kind of reporting system, for child pornography. So I was the first one in the whole country. So once I started to hit the airwaves, people were sending me child pornography, via email, because internet was still dial-up back then, right? I mean, woo, woo, right? Remember those days?
Yeah,
and
sure.
And so people were sending me this stuff, and it was pretty tough to open up an email, and it was shocking. And those voices, the kids' cries, they stick with you, right? It's pretty tough. But
back in the 80s, when I sued the Catholic Church for child abuse by the clergy, the hierarchy of the church acted like my clients were traitors. And I was the bad guy. It didn't occur to them that they were enablers or co-conspirators. And the local police was reluctant to get involved. Was that your experience? Was the government immediately resistant to you, or were they cooperative with you?
No, just like I said, Ralph Klein, who was average Joe Blow, reporter that became a politician, but all the other politicians. Actually, no, Heather Forsyth out of Calgary, she and I brought Amber Alert into Canada. She was excellent. But the rest, no, it was like pulling teeth the whole way. And the church was especially difficult. We boycotted outside a Catholic church in Calgary because they had taken a pedophile priest, convicted, out of Ontario. And what did they do? They put him into
they transfer him to Calgary.
They
tell me
transferred
about
him
it.
to Calgary, right? And so now he's got a new congregation, and they defended him. It was shocking, like, absolutely shocking. So when we boycotted outside that church, that became a real divide, because I realized that the priests were above the law. Why are they not going to prison? I never knew of one I never knew of one priest that had gone to prison. I don't know if you have.
Not then.
No, but back then, no one was, right? And even into the
MO
early 2000s.
The MO was that the new church wouldn't be advised,
right,
of his history.
No,
they wouldn't tell the new congregation.
Well, the archbishop knew of it. The archbishop for the district knew, but
always, but they don't tell anybody.
No. And so when I brought this to the public attention, boy, did the archbishop come after me. Whew.
Yeah, I'm sure
he was angry. And like
you're the bad guy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. This is a lovely priest. He's done his time. He's, gone through his retraining. Yeah. Get out the violin, right? And this was a story that they would tell, that, this is curable, and that he's done his training and he's all good now. And so they just shipped him off across the country to a new place. Mm-hmm.
And what about the various changes in the law? Did you experience cooperation or resistance?
No, it was more resistance than cooperation, 100% of the time. You would find little glimpse of hope. What's her name? Oh, on the tip of my tongue. She was probably I shouldn't be mentioning her. She was a minister out of Ontario, and she was my biggest wall in Ottawa. She would actually, what's the word I'm looking for? She would fudge numbers, right? She would fudge truths. Like, she would state this obscure study that I just happened to see the night before, and I knew what she was talking about. And she was saying that, a sex offender registry, we can't do that because of, vigilantism. There was a study done out of Washington State, and it showed that the recidivism rate can actually go higher because, they can be driven into, reoffending because of all the pressure. And so there's more arrests. And I just happened to see that the night before. And I said, actually, I know the study you're talking about out of Washington State, and the recidivism rate was actually, they were being picked up because they had a week, I believe it was, to re-register their address, and they weren't registering their address on the registry. And so they were being picked up. So statistically, you could argue that they were being arrested again, but the arrests were because they weren't registering their address. And there were just little things like that. Like, you really had to be on the ball because you didn't know who your enemy was, right? And often it was people within the government. And so for a person like I wasn't a reader, I was illiterate until my 40s. My divorce was probably the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced me to read. I couldn't afford justice. I had to remortgage my house, and so I learned a lot about the law. And
so you hop on your podium.
Yes.
You make a big stink.
Yes.
And the laws change.
Yes.
Can you take us? We're kind of running out of time, but can you
Sure.
take us quickly through what laws changed from then to now?
Well, now we're still, you know, there aren't that many advocates. So we have minimum sentencing now, 5 years. I've been out of the law aspect for probably, I guess it's about 8 years now. So I can't speak to what is exactly current today, but I can tell you that, like Carrie's guardian angel law, it was asking for a minimum of 20 years. We never got that. It went to third reading. It was defeated by the Liberal Party. It took one vote to defeat it. One guy showed up and he defeated it. So we never got that. We don't really have strong minimum sentencing like you guys have in the States. I mean, I was just reading some stuff from way back, and I was seeing that you have minimum laws that are 15 to 30 years for, sexual interference. And we don't have that. We might have 5 years with certain cases now, but, it's not like what we are across the border. And so that was my argument, that we have become a pedophile haven, because if you're a pedophile and you're looking at one country and you're going to get 130 years, and you have a strong police system that is, enforcing this, and then you have another country that, you might get 6 months served time, or okay, now you might get 10 years, but 10 years isn't 10 years. 10 years is 3 years or 5 years max, right? And then you can appeal it. And and the programs that they're in, we have 5 pedophile prisons across the country, and so they're not in regular prison with regular prisoners anymore. They're actually in 5 specific prisons across the country. And so that's created a community, right? They share pictures, they share stories with one another, pictures of their victims, sites that work. They role play, one will be the victim and one will be the predator in their cells. So it's not prison time. And then, of course, they have programs. In those days, it was the Phoenix program, and it was all for their psychological welfare. But we were forgetting about the kids. The kids' psychological welfare was actually 100% dependent upon the financial wherewithal of the parents. If they could actually afford, the psychiatrist to help the child through, we would give 24-hour hotlines, 1-800 hotlines to the pedophile, and there was absolutely no support for the kids. So that, I think Canada still needs Megan's Law. I think we still need to bring in, restitution for children. There was a time, until I pointed it out, that the Canadian government used to charge fines against pedophiles, $500,000, $5,000. But that money would never go to the child for restitution. It would go to the political coffers, to the court system, right? So once I pointed it out that, the legal system was profiting from, child pornography and rape, that stopped pretty fast.
Who helped you more, the media or the government?
Back then, the media, definitely. Media was very much on my side. They were so frustrated with having to, cover all of these cases. And I think that's why it's been tragic to watch, what's happened through where we're at today, because I think investigative reporters are not there anymore. It's a big business. We have 4 or 5 owners that own all the media in Canada, and it's just, from the top down. They don't think for themselves as much anymore. So that's why shows like this are so imperative, because that's how you get the truth out there.
In doing some research on you, I found you used an interesting term. You called pedophilia the silent epidemic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's such an appropriate term. Can you tell the people why that is such an appropriate term for this?
Well, I think it speaks for itself.
What I would agree was an epidemic.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's grown exponentially. I mean, when I look back, 2001, I was in front of the Justice Committee saying, if we don't do something quick worldwide, right, we're going to be seeing virtual raping of children. We're going to see, live streams of child rape where people can just, men and women, they can pay online for this. And it's like in the dark web, right? But it's not even the dark web anymore. It's now out, everywhere. So it is an epidemic proportions, and it's silent. We still don't talk about it the way that we really should. I believe that countries are judged by how they treat their children. And so far, the world pretty much is getting a failing grade. There's a couple of countries that are amazing. Sweden has done a really good job with protecting kids. But, there's very few countries. And so I think that our silence is our acceptance. When I was first starting out, that was, downloaded. It was just a word that kept coming, or a sentence that kept coming through. Your silence is your acceptance. Your silence is your acceptance. And this is a silent epidemic. So the more that we're quiet about it, the more it will grow. And I think that's why, when we look at the DOMs, the deep underground military bunkers, and the children and all of that, and the A word, the traumatized blood from children, it's a whole industry, $1 trillion industry. With more people speaking about these things, we're actually going to change things, I think, when people stand up and say enough is enough. Because until then, it remains a silent epidemic.
You've experienced some symptoms of what I guess you could call PTSD.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that a little bit.
Well, that goes back to when people were sending me child pornography. I've seen pretty much everything now, but there were a few things that just really stick with you, right? The cries of children's and the whimpers and the unthinkable things that a human could do to a child. You never think that would be humanly possible. And that sticks with you. And I think that's why I did Full Circle, because I had to heal myself. And so through meditation, through exercises of energetic release, like, having all that crap as a big heavy coat and just feeling that coat slide off my back and fall to the ground, let it go, literally let it go. Doing simple things like that really had helped. And meditation was a big part of it. So I've, like I said, come full circle. And now, we have a retreat center, and we help people that have gone through trauma and drama in their lifetime to come through the other side. PTSD is a pretty tough, thank God we know what it is now, because I thought I was just cranky, for a long time, and really PMS-y.
She sounds like my wife, Bob.
Yeah, sounds like me, actually.
Yeah. I was going to say, yeah, it's men, women, everyone, right? When you go through that kind of trauma, but there is a way out, and that I learned, And like I said, unfortunately, it cost me my first marriage, but gosh, I learned a lot in the process. And, it was quite a journey. We had death threats. That was really tough in the family, because, the guys from Bowdoin prisoners would phone our house and threaten me, and we had an unlisted number. I was in hiding with 2 little kids.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. It's a movie, chases, car chases, helicopters over top, all kinds of stuff back then.
Sounds like.
I was exposing some pretty big pedophile rings. The ring in Cornwall and the one in Kingsclear. These were senators. These were major politicians, the premier of the province, for goodness sakes, RCMP officers. I was just taking on some pretty heavy things.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about the 5 Lessons of Life, your book.
So this is the book It just won a big award. It won third in the world with the reader's favorite book competition. So this is an international competition, and it won third in the world with religion, spirituality, and philosophy. It's about my two deaths. I died twice, 27, 28 years old, and I saw both the dark side and the light side, and it is the 5 lessons that I came back with.
Okay, now, Carrie, now wait a minute. Nobody actually dies and comes back. So you have to explain that, okay?
No, I really did. Yeah, I had heart attacks. I've had heart attacks all my life. And it's in the family. Grandmother died at 32, mom, massive bypass at 42. And at 27, I had a pretty strong heart attack. And this is the experience that I had. So when I came back, I felt very driven to do what I ended up doing. And I think it also explains, when you die, you have no fear of death anymore. So without that fear, you can do anything. You can sit in front of a politician and call them down and say, you're going to have to change the law. And you're not going to leave until you actually change it, right? I mean, because what are they going to do? You've already
changes your perspective. That's for sure.
It really does. Yeah, so, it's beautiful.
So, Carrie, what's next for you?
Well, gosh, I'm teaching here. I'm helping a lot of people, and I think that's I'm really enjoying Europe. I'm really enjoying Portugal, and we're going to see how we do politically. I'm hoping that all of this is going to change, the political stance, and will come into more of like Michael Tillinger's One Small Town, where it's more community dependent upon one another, where we have community gardens and community assistance for one another, where we volunteer and work with one another. I don't know if you know Michael Tillinger's One Small Town, but it's a great concept. And I think that's actually where we could move to future-wise with the whole world. Still having borders, still having countries, but I think it's actually a wonderful concept. And in that, there's 100% protection of children and accountability of every citizen. So, I don't think there's a cure for pedophilia. I think that we need to look at communities, perhaps. Castration doesn't work. We found that out in California. They just take, drug enhancements, hormone replacement therapy, and they're right back in business with castration. So that doesn't work. I think that the study that was done out of Florida, where they actually created a community, if a pedophile was a lawyer, for instance, or a doctor or whatever, adults could go into the community and get their services from these pedophiles at a discounted rate. They still were contributing towards society, but they had no access to children at all. That's where I think we need to move to. So yeah, there's still lots of laws that I would like to amend and write. And I think that as a community, we need to have more round circles. It's like, I'm Aboriginal, I'm Métis. And I think one of the beautiful things about the Aboriginal community is if they had a problem, they came together in a circle and they would talk it out, right? They would talk about, the offender and what would be best for that offender moving forward. I don't think pedophiles should have any access to children ever again. Once an offender, always an offender when it comes to pedophilia.
I agree 1,000%.
Yeah. And so we need to, I don't really like the idea of death penalty, but I think that a pedophile community where they can be contributing citizens, to the community still of adults, that might be something that we would look at moving forward. Otherwise, there's really not much choice. If you have someone that is going to scar a child for the rest of their life, this isn't just a sexual offense. This is affecting a human being for the rest of their life, right?
Of course.
Yeah. So we've got to stop taking it so lightly, and especially in Canada.
We're out of time. Thank you so much for being here.
It was a pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Carrie, it really was a fascinating conversation. It's such an important topic. It's hard to believe that some of these things actually happen. And thank God for people like you who are out there fighting. I want to remind everybody that Mark Bello also has been out there fighting as an author and as an attorney. Mark has published a series of ripped from the headlines legal thrillers. All of them are available at Amazon and other major online booksellers. He is quite the hero in attorney Zachary Blake, who fights for justice on all fronts. His books are Betrayal of Faith, Betrayal of Justice, Betrayal in Blue, Betrayal in Black, Betrayal High, Supreme Betrayal, and just out, Betrayal at the Border. So for more information, just check out markmbello.com. Now, Carrie, your book is available where?
Right around the world, 29 countries with Amazon. It's been an international bestseller for 2 years now. And so Barnes & Noble have it. It's pretty much online. Chapters Indigo in Canada.
So people just need to Google The 5 Lessons of Life.
By Carrie Kohan.
By Carrie, and it's Carrie, Kohan, Kohan.
Yes,
right? Okay.
That's right.
All right.
And may I say just quickly, Mark, I would love to follow up with you to hear your story because, gosh, it sounds absolutely incredible. Congratulations on all the work that you've done as well. Well done.
Thank you. Read Betrayal of Faith. It's a story. It's a fictional account of the story we're talking about.
Okay, I will. Wow.
My first book.
Really?
That'll pretty much tell you what it felt like for me as a young lawyer taking on the Catholic Church.